If you have a pulse, you probably hate the subject of taxes and running the bookkeeping portion of your business. But like it or not, if you want to be a successful podcaster, you are going to have to pay attention to your numbers. But don't worry, we have the answer for you, Core Financial. Our friends over at Core Financial have taken the pressure off of us so we can focus on what we love doing most, running our podcast. They take care of all of our taxes, monthly bookkeeping, financial plans, and make sure we take full advantage of all of the tax benefits we qualify for. It just feels good knowing we aren't going to get a big surprise during tax season. If you are serious about building a business with your podcast, head on over to howtomakeapodcast.co/core to see what they can do for you.
In today's podcast, I have something I want to share with you really quick. As you know, John and I are so excited about the Podcast Blueprint. It's our course where we tell you step by step how we monetized our own podcast, How to Film Weddings, and made over $250,000 in 18 months. In our How to Make a Podcast group, we have been listening to you and talking with you and interacting with you, and we have heard your questions. And so what we decided to do is next week, July 6th, we are going to start the Perfect Podcast Challenge, where for 5 days, we are going to teach you portions of our course, the Podcast Blueprint, for free. You don't need to pay anything. You are going to get some free training from our signature course. We're going to have lots of giveaways. We're giving away a Rode Podcaster Studio Kit, a Rode Pod Mic. We're giving away a $100 Amazon gift card, a 1-year subscription to Adobe Audition, and so much more. We're also going to be giving away to 3 lucky winners our entire Podcast Blueprint course. Join the challenge to win all of these great prizes. What you need to do is head over to challenge.podcastblueprint.co to sign up. We are so looking forward to this. We cannot wait to see you in the challenge starting Monday, July 6th. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of How to Make a Podcast. My name is Nick Miller and I am joined by my best good buddy. I say that a lot. I need something else to introduce you, John, but I am joined...
I'm happy with it.
Okay, cool. I am joined by Mr. John Bunn. John, how are you doing today?
I couldn't be doing better. You know, the launch of our How to Make a Podcast, we're in... The podcast is happening. We passed 1,000 downloads already, which is crazy. I mean, How long did it take us to get 1,000 downloads of How to Film Weddings? So it's so cool. The Facebook group is growing. There's over 1,000 people in there. Lots and lots of good things going on. I can't be happier about How to Make a Podcast and the influence and what it's doing already in the podcasting community. How are you? I know you just got back from vacation. You look all rested. No circles under the eyes.
I mean, it really wasn't a restful vacation. That's probably just, computer screen, because whenever you travel and you travel with some friends and you have your kids and they have their daughter that's 2.5 and you're going back a time zone. So we're in mountain time zone. And so it's like they're waking up at like 5 o'clock every day because, whatever. So... But it was good. We had a good time. We went to South Dakota, Custer State Park. We went to Lake Sylvan. We saw Mount Rushmore, Crazy Horse, all of the fun stuff up there. Anyways, a good trip. I really enjoyed it. But glad to be home, glad to be back. And I'm really excited about this announcement. We have been pushing for the last couple of months about something that John and I have put together, and that is the Podcast Blueprint. And I want to let you know that we have a launch date for the Podcast Blueprint, and that is, John, I will give you the honors. You can share it. When is the Podcast Blueprint launch date?
It is Thursday, July 9th, just a couple of weeks away. It is just about finished. We're putting the final touches on it, all the freebies, all the extras, all the bonuses. It is over 80 sections from beginning to end. Everything you need to know to get going with your podcast, all the way through recording it, monetizing it, marketing it, analyzing it, and just growing it. I mean, it's really been kind of crazy. We weren't going to start this group or this podcast until next year, but with quarantine, we just went for it and we are blown away. But yeah, the 80 sections plus, everything you need to know. It is going to be incredible. July 9th, mark your calendars. yeah, I mean, that's it. July 9th. Super excited about it.
Yeah, we are definitely really excited about that. And one of the things that is included for free when you purchase this podcast blueprint is one of our sponsors, Zencast, is going to actually give you 3 months of hosting for free. 3 months.
It's unbelievable.
And
it's so
if you're
good.
like, I'd love to take advantage of this hosting service, but I'm hosting somewhere else. Guess what? They have a 1-button transfer option for free. So all you do is if you're like, hey, I want to use this, you just push 1 button and it will import and transfer all of everything over from your current hosting site to their new one. We are blown away by Zencast. We love them, and they have partnered with us for the podcast blueprint. This is your step-by-step guide to a profitable podcast. We are so excited about it. Again, the launch date is July 9th. We will have more information about this in the next week and a half. 2 weeks is where we're coming up on this really soon. But we're going to jump into today's episode and talk more about growing your podcast and all of that. And we want to focus on growing your podcast audience, because I think that is one of the things that everyone is like, okay, I've recorded my episodes. I have, 5, 10, 15 recorded. I've put them out there, but I'm not getting any listens. I'm not getting any downloads. How do you grow your audience? So we want to spend a little bit of time talking about that today.
Yes, and before jumping over to that, this section today that we're talking about, growing an audience, is a very, very micro portion of something that's in the podcast blueprint. We failed to mention podcastblueprint.co. Is that right?
Podcastblueprint.co. Yeah, as you were talking, I thought, man, I need to plug the website. And then I didn't plug the website. So
there it was. But yes, today,
podcastblueprint.co.
In growing an audience, we have the two biggest sections in our course are all about growing an audience, because that's something that I think so many of us, we focus so hard on the quality of the microphones and all this stuff, but we forget to talk about how we actually grow the audience and how we get people to tune in, the distribution side of things. And so, your episodes are recorded. Now what? What do you do now? Mm-hmm. And so it's just time to spread the word about your shows. And so, like Nick said, one of the main questions we do get asked is, how do you grow your audience? And the first thing that we would say is you need to very clearly define your audience. The first thing you need to do, I'll say it again, is to clearly define your audience. Nick, what does that mean?
So you need to know who your intended listener is. We say this all the time. You've maybe heard it before, especially in business type stuff. There are riches in the niches, and you need to narrow your focus down enough, okay, so that people that are interested in that thing will find it. One thing that I know John has talked about for so long in his wedding video business is he was like, I wanted, every bride that could possibly hire me to hire me. So he was like, if I were ice cream, I was vanilla. I just wanted, I wanted everyone. I didn't want to turn everyone down. It was like I was a fire hydrant and I just opened, the cap off the front of it and water spewed everywhere. And I was just trying to hit anybody and get that business from anyone that would come. But in both of our wedding video businesses, it wasn't until we narrowed down who we believed our ideal client was that we saw more success and we saw our profits go way up, because we had defined who that was. And for us, with our other podcast, How to Film Weddings, we decided that our audience was going to be wedding videographers. Now, is this the largest group of people in the world? Absolutely not. Okay. We're getting thousands of downloads a month, but there are big podcasts out there that we know are getting hundreds of thousands or millions of downloads a month. Okay. So we know that we're not huge, but we have that defined audience of who they are, and it's niched down, but it's not too niched down, meaning, wedding videographers is who we want to reach, but it's not wedding videographers that only shoot on this specific camera. Okay, that's probably too niche. So you need to define your audience. Are you a WWE podcast? Are you a health and fitness podcast? Are you a cooking podcast? Are you a travel podcast? whenever you have these things, who are the people that you want to listen to, and then that can really help you make the best decisions in moving forward with your podcast.
So once you've defined this audience, I know some people want to just do entrepreneurship or business, and that's okay. You just need to know who that is. I mean, you can niche down so much, where if you're a fitness person and you want to only be a podcast for elderly women or for obese men, I don't know, like you can be niched down. Your audience gets smaller usually the more niched you get. So there's kind of a happy place there, but clearly defining that audience will help you get the right people to listen to your show. Yes. And that's the next point is you want to get the right people to listen to your show. I see a lot in other groups, and this is something from the beginning of our Facebook group where we did not want people to just do follow for follow or leave me a review and I'll leave you a review or download my episodes so my numbers go up. Like, we do not care about numbers more than we care about, the pure audience. And so getting the right people to listen to your show, even if it's slow going at the beginning, if you get the right people to listen and the content is good, they're going to start getting more of the right people to listen to your show. Like, you don't want to share this with your mom and say, hey, Mom, download this so I can get another download. That really doesn't do anything for you except for give you another number. And yes, numbers are important, but like if all you're doing is spamming your Facebook, page and saying, hey, everybody, just download this for me so I get more downloads, like that doesn't build a real audience, and that's building a house of cards. It'll all fall down, and it's one of those things where it would be better to have 10 real people listening than 10,000 downloads of just people that you spammed and they downloaded it for you.
Right. If you're a real estate podcast person, okay, why do you want some old retiree that isn't interested in investing in property or moving or anything? Why do you want them to listen to your podcast? Okay, the purer your audience is, all right, that's going to help you grow it so that people that are interested in that will find it. But also, from a marketing monetizing standpoint, that's going to make your numbers more viable if it goes that way too. So you need to ask that question: why do you want numbers? I mean, we all like that. We all do that when it comes to our Instagram accounts or our YouTube channels, I just need subs or I need a follow or something like that, because to some degree that number next to us does give us validation, right? But John and I say this all the time. We would much rather have, 50 committed followers than 5,000 people that are kind of like meh about what we have to say. So, find that pure audience. And with that, whenever you have that pure audience, okay, if it continues consistently long enough and you continue to put out the quality material over and over again over a long period of time, people of your niche will find it. Okay, we are across, and this is our podcast downloads. This is across YouTube and Facebook. All of the major platforms. We're getting somewhere between 15 and 25,000 unique listens to our show, How to Film Weddings, on all of those platforms, which generates us thousands of dollars each month. We've talked about that in previous episodes. So we would not be able to have that success if one week we were talking about wedding video stuff, but then the next week we were talking about gardening. Like, that just doesn't make sense.
And so, if you look at these steps, the first thing you want to do is to clearly define your audience. You want to make sure to write that down, draw a picture of who that is. Who is the ideal avatar that you're talking to when you're podcasting? The next thing is getting the right people to listen to the show. And we'll dive into that deeper here in a little bit, but not just getting downloads for downloads' sakes. And then taking your time and growing that number every single week of real people does get you to a point where even with our 15 to 25,000 downloads a month on our channel, it is generating us, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year at this point. But it took time. It wasn't like in month one. If we look back on our stats and the graphs, it has slowly built. Every single month, more and more people are listening. And, a lot of things come down to just people are there's so much content out there. And so if you're not consistent in your podcast, and you might be episode 40 or 50 in before you say, oh, okay, this has floated to the top. People keep talking about this. I keep seeing this. I think about my favorite TV show, which is The Office. And I didn't start watching it until season 3. And what was interesting about that is all of my friends where I worked would talk about The Office, and they were pulling these pranks like, Jim pulled on Dwight, and they were putting things in Jell-O, and I was like, okay, I keep hearing about this, let me check this out. And when I did, I went back and binge watched everything and tried to get my hands on the DVD sets at that point. And so they just consistently kept putting content on. I know a lot of people started watching Game of Thrones a few seasons in or whatever. And so having this consistent content over time, that starts to build this reputation, and getting in front of the right people again and again, that is what's going to grow your show. And so what that did for us, if you imagine you're a company that sells something to wedding videographers, like if you are a editing for wedding filmmakers service, if you know the numbers at that point from How to Film Weddings, our other podcast, that there are 5,000 legit bought-in people. This was maybe 15 months in whenever we had somebody come to us that was editing wedding films, and they said, how many people are you, each month? And we're somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 wedding filmmakers. That's not a huge group of people, but to them, all they could see was dollar signs. It's totally worth it for them to pay thousands of dollars a month to show up and be the guys when it comes to editing weddings. And because we had built that reputation, people trusted us when we told them about this company. We vetted them and did different things, but whenever we put our stamp of approval on them, they started getting not tens or dozens, they started getting hundreds of inquiries, and they've generated multiple six figures off of what we have been able to provide them. And so it's this nice symbiotic relationship where they're making a lot of money, they're paying us a lot of money, and we're all very happy. I talked for a very long time, Nick. What did I miss? And then you can take us over to break.
Man, I don't think you missed anything. The point that we're getting at is, if you really want to grow this and you want to be in this podcast industry for the long haul, follow for follow doesn't work. Being consistent is what you need to do. Another problem, is we talk about building an audience, and people are like, oh, I've been doing this for a year, but I can't get any traction. But they're like, okay, this week we released an episode on Monday. The next week we released one on Thursday. The next week we released 4 episodes. Then we didn't do anything for a month. And, if you don't have that consistency, it's really hard to build an audience that way. Finding the right people, you do these things. And another thing that John and I preach, is the crockpot method. It just takes time to do this. If you are consistent over time and continue to do this, then you will grow your audience, you will grow your channel, you will grow your podcast. So we're going to continue talking about growing your audience and all of that right after this break. So you've got everything you need for your podcast. You've recorded your audio and video. You're so excited, but wait, you don't know how to master the audio or edit the video of your podcast. We know someone who can help. The podcast editors. Picture this. You record both audio and video for your podcast. You upload it to your remote editor, and a few days later, your podcast is ready for you to upload and push to the world. What will you do with your extra time? Connect with sponsors? Grow your Facebook group? Start that project or even course you have dreamed of for months? The possibilities are endless. We are blown away by the podcast editors and love working with them and using their services. They can edit audio, video, or both for your podcast. Don't get stuck trying to do this on your own. Get in touch with the podcast editors today. If you'd like to save 50% off of your first project, head over to howtomakeapodcast.co/thepodcasteditors.
We can't tell you how frustrating it was for us to upload our podcast when we first got started. The websites were clunky, we had data limits, and it was all so confusing. That is until we found Zencast. Zencast is an online platform built for podcasters to not only upload their podcast, but track their listeners, connect to their audience, and so much more. Zencast's plans have no upload or download limits, so your costs won't grow as you do. Embed their player that automatically updates to show the latest episodes of your show. Zencast lets you see your podcast downloads along with your web traffic in Google Analytics. Zencast also supports multiple podcasts under one account. The best part is, if you already have a podcast on another platform, you can switch to Zencast with a one-click importer, all free of charge. So what are you waiting for? Head on over to howtomakeapodcast.co/Zencast to start saving time and money with your podcast today.
Welcome back from break, and we want to start this section by a review from our friend Vince W. Matthews, and he left this on Apple Podcasts. These guys know what they are talking about. I love their willingness to share their experiences, knowledge, wisdom, and expertise. For any podcasters, this will cut your learning curve, making you go further faster if you put in the work and stay consistent. Big ups to y'all. Thanks, Vince. We really appreciate that review. Makes me feel good. Does it make you feel good to hear
Love
that?
it. Yeah, I mean, we're only a couple weeks into this podcast and already getting these reviews. We haven't asked for these reviews. These are awesome. So thanks, Vince. That means a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Vince. We really appreciate that. And now I want to jump into our question of the day presented by the Podcast Blueprint that is releasing here in a couple weeks, podcastblueprint.co. And that is, how did we grow our audience?
The question of the day is the question of the hour. It's the question we get asked all the time. Growing your audience, and the big secret, if you're ready for it.
I am ready for the big secret. I'm ready.
There's not a big secret. It's a lot of hard work, and there is a lot that goes into it. In the rest of this episode, we'll do our best to break down 3 ways that we feel like are the best way to grow your audience. And I'll answer that and say the 3 ways that we did that we really feel like are something you should look into. Number 1, online groups such as Facebook groups or Reddit threads, or just big groups where people are congregating around your subject. Number 2 is making use of connections that you have in your industry. Who do you know that knows somebody else? This is where business is made, and this is where your podcast will grow so much, by connecting with others that are connected to you. So that's number 2. And number 3, which is the big one for us, and that is having guests on your show. And we're going to do more episodes about how to do with guests and how to really get the most out of guests. But those are the 3 things that we want to spend the rest of the episode talking about. So the answer to that question, Nick, there's so many things. But for the rest of this episode, we're going to be talking about online groups, connections, and guests. So online groups, Nick, when we first started our podcast, we didn't have our own Facebook group. That's not what we're talking about. We had built relationships with people and admins inside of other Facebook groups for us. Depending on your podcast, you might be, a group somewhere else, a forum somewhere else, but the principle stays the same. And, these online wedding videographers groups, we were very involved. We were not spammy, and we were, very strategic about the way that we went about introducing how to film weddings to these wedding videographers groups. We see it so many times. Some new kid pops into the group and says, "Here, check out my free download and it's super annoying. Everyone feels spammed out about it. But instead, what did we do, Nick? We slowly leaked information about how to film weddings. We slowly started getting the word out there. And then every now and then, by asking the admins of the group, we would say, "Hey, can we post this episode? This is a good one. This one might be helpful." And we slowly started doing it that way. Yeah. Nick, do you remember anything else about the Facebook groups?
Yeah. Yes, John was really with our How to Film Weddings podcast. He was like, I don't want another group. There's already like 3 or 4 kind of big ones that people are a part of, and what's the point of it? And whenever we started seeing value in our podcast was growing and the purpose of it, and the fact that we could push our podcast in our own group, and how we could, when we had digital products, we could easily sell those. We could have conversations, and like we could kind of control what went on in the group and what happened in the group. We saw a lot of value, and then we were able to create our brand, within that Facebook group. But it did take some time, and we wanted to do it right, and we wanted to have a right reason. You need to, again, like figure out your audience and what is the purpose of you doing that. After having a group, and then we get people that are a part of it, they want to make a name for themselves, and then they start sharing things that they are working on, or things that gets really annoying, because we feel like, okay, we have built this thing, we have built this community, and it has taken us a lot of work, and now you are trying to profit off of what we have done. So that is one thing that I think we learned in creating a group and building an audience, is how frustrating and annoying it can be to have someone try to peel stuff away from something we worked really hard on.
Yeah. And so there's two different things we're talking about here. Number one is being a part of other Facebook groups. And then the other thing, like what Nick is talking about, is we built our own Facebook group. And so for this, when it's talking about growing your audience, we used both of these things. We started though, and we don't necessarily recommend that everybody build a new Facebook group for a specific topic. But if you're the guy that just goes into other people's groups that they've built and start spamming them with your product, you're not going to get very far. And so in our podcast blueprint course, we go into detail about like ways to actually reach out to admins, things you should say, how to build those relationships. So when it is time for you to ask something, you're not just this random spam bot. Yep. You are a person there. And so that's what we did in Facebook groups. There were several wedding videography groups. I was very friendly. Nick was very friendly. We were very present for months and months and months at a time before ever pushing our own agenda inside of those groups. And so we would say little things, and message the admins and get approval. And if they said no, we would not post in the group, but we would always respond to people's comments, and people would just kind of get who we were and see our faces a lot. And so that was huge for the growth of our group. And so I know we could spend the rest of the episode going into Facebook groups, and that's the hard part about this for me with this podcast, but we have several sections inside of our course that go into much more detail about the Facebook groups. The next thing on the list, Nick, is connections. I remember when we first got going with our podcast, we reached out to pretty much everyone in the wedding video industry and said, hey, we've got this podcast idea. We want you to check it out. We want you to see if it's something. And we got all this feedback from people, and then said to them, hey, would you help us spread the word that this exists? Who could you share this with? How can you, who do you know that might be a good person to listen to this? Who do you know that might be a good person to be a guest on this show? And because we had spent years building relationships with people without asking them to buy anything from us, that really played well in our favor.
Yeah. Yeah. A thing in any industry, I think that a majority of people forget about is networking. Networking is so huge, because truly in our day and age, in our world, it is more about who you know than what you know. You've probably heard that a whole lot, but the older I get and the more I see the world and I see how people interact, it is 100% true. Who you know matters way more than what you know. Obviously, what you know does matter, but to get that in, to other people and for help, networking is so valuable. And so I remember before we started our podcast, we launched a YouTube channel. And whenever we created these videos, we asked a few people that we knew to kind of beta test some of our videos, and we just said, okay, would you watch this? Would you give me some feedback? What are some things that I need to change? What are some things that I need to think about? Do I need to edit this differently? Is the sound okay? Like that kind of information. So we could get feedback. So using the people in the industry to help us, and then, getting their feedback, they felt valued. Okay. Now you don't want to take advantage of people. Whenever you're asking, your connections to help out. Okay. But if they feel value and they feel like they are giving something and getting something in return, they're going to be way more likely to spread your product, whatever that may be. And then again, with the connections, we think that you need to give a lot and not ask for people to buy all the time. If all you are doing is asking people to buy using your connections, saying, hey, person who might like this thing, hey, buy this product from me and give me a review. Like that might not work very well for you. But, if you use those connections and then you can, give them something for them to review, that can go a long way as well. So it takes time. Build relationships, consistency compounds, consistently ask for their help, go back to these people, ask for feedback, and then use those connections positively for your brand. And then can we move on to the last one? Touch on that? Yeah. And then the last one is going to be your guests on your show. Okay. In whatever podcast niche that you have, there are celebrities in that niche. Okay. Now, probably not to the real world or anything like that, but in all of our circles, we have people that are quote unquote famous people. And if there is a way that you can use your connections to get in contact with them and reach out, and most of the time, these people are just real people that are cool to hang out with and cool to talk to. And they love to, interview and talk, to people and that kind of stuff. So reach out to those people and headline your podcast with them. Okay. I don't know. I see in a lot of these podcast groups, people are like, hey, this is what my podcast is about. I'm telling stories about this. Is there anyone who would want to come on my show and talk about this thing with me? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't surprise me that they're having a tough time getting some traction with listens because people don't know who that guest is. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah. And for us, I go into the course, but I think that so many people are worried that someone would say no, or they're like, I don't really want to have guests because it adds a lot of extra, to our plate to get their audio and different things like that. But for us, and if you don't want to add guests, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But it is the number one way that we built our audience so quickly. Mm-hmm. If you think about it, we were probably 8 or 9 episodes, 10 episodes in before we found, a few guests that had a little bit of a following. But if you ask somebody that's a celebrity in your industry or somebody that is up and coming and has a pretty good following, to be on your show, if you do it right, and if you think about it, you can siphon some of their followers to be followers of you. And so this is basically what we did. Over the course of 110 episodes at this point, we've had probably about 55 guests on. So we go back and forth between just Nick and I on an episode. And then, we do that about half the time. And then the other half of the time, we bring on somebody to be a guest. And so we ask them and get them on our schedule. And there's a lot that goes into it. And we're going to do that and talk about that in the next episode. But the guest side of things, when we first started getting some of these bigger names on, what that does is it proves that you're valid, that you have cred definitely to more and more guests. So they're like, oh, well, if that person was on their show, I would be on their show. Because if you're asking somebody and they see that no one's on your show and never been on your show, that might be harder, to get some of that traction. And so it is a little bit of a dance, and using some of those connections, like Nick said, and figuring out if there is a way to get people that you look up to on your show, interviewing them, having really good content, giving them the correct, pieces of content or little graphics or whatever to help share when your episode goes live. And you do that over time. If you think about it, in 52 weeks of a year, if you had 50 episodes, in 25 of those episodes you had a guest, and on average, every time that you had a new guest on, you added 20 new listeners. I mean, that's 400 new listeners. Just like that. Is that right? 25 times 20, 4,000 new listeners. What's 25 times 20? 250? I don't know. It's a lot. The point is, I'll do math later. I'll post it in the comments. Nick's like, I don't do math. The point is, we added new people every single week. Sometimes we'd add hundreds of listeners because it was a bigger person, bigger following. Sometimes we only had a few listeners, but every week more and more people are getting brought into our community, and we're getting them involved and teaching them about our Facebook group and showing them that we are legit. And then if you do that over time, somewhere around 40 episodes in, people were like, oh my goodness, you guys are blowing up. This is crazy. And it took 7-8 months, but then everything started coming together. And so I'll do some math real quick. Nick, you talk for a sec.
One thing that I just want you to be mindful of. Okay?
500. That's right.
Okay.
500 new listeners.
One thing I want you to be mindful of, and I don't think this is going to be like, I don't think this is the industry standard right now. But as podcasts become more and more popular and people know that you might need to, like, there are some people that we would reach out to that I think that they knew that we were using them and their audience to grow our thing. Okay. There might be some people that will say, sure, I will come on your podcast for X amount of dollars. Okay. Because you're basically marketing me to get my listeners to listen to you. Okay. Now that I don't hear about that very much right now. Okay. But as podcasting continues to grow and get bigger, I think there are going to be some people in specific industries with names that will start doing that to make it worth their time, because I'm sure they're getting bombarded with that kind of stuff all the time. So a couple of things to be mindful of that. And then also, as we're talking about guests, make sure you're set up with a guest contract so that they sign it and basically say, okay, all of this stuff that I am saying on this podcast now belongs to the people of the podcast, basically, and they can use it however they want. Okay. I know that that's not specifically what we're talking about, but I wanted you to be mindful of those things.
Yeah, and what you're saying is 1,000,000% correct when it comes to bringing guests on your show. You don't want to just take, you want to be thinking about ways that you can give to them. And at the beginning, we didn't have much to give. We didn't have a big audience. And so now when people come on, a lot of times they'll have a product to pitch, or they'll have some new, service that they're selling. And so we leverage our audience to them and say, hey, if you'll be on, we'll let you plug your product in exchange for content. And so, and there's just this balance, some people will be like, I don't have the time. I don't want to, if you want me to be on, I'll charge you $500, and it might not be worth it for you at that time. And the thing is, in every single industry, there are people that would, while you're getting going, we would recommend, like bringing people on that would be willing to do it in exchange for just, the exposure.
The exposure box, yep.
But if you have a guest and if you have a budget where you're like, if I could get this person on, this would be huge for me, and you want to pay money and you have the money to do it, we're not saying that there's anything wrong with that. But most people listening aren't setting aside $2,000 or $3,000 an episode to have guests on. So, it's a fine balance. But Nick, that is wrapping it all up. That is kind of the first part of growing an audience. Like we've mentioned, I don't know, a gajillion times in this episode, we go into super depth on this exact topic inside the podcast blueprint. Head on over to podcastblueprint.co to check it out. We are launching that very shortly on July 9th. So check it out. Be sure to join our Facebook group. And until next time, we'll see you.
See ya.